Well, so this is it. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for not only agreeing to sit down with us, but opening up your home to us.
Of course.
So, yeah, Nick and I are both very excited to have this conversation.
Good.
We are. We appreciate it. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, yeah, if we typically like to get started just by trying to understand a little bit more about your background, how you got here. So, if you're open to sharing.
Sure. Of course. I was born in San Ramon, California. Not really.
I was going to say.
No, really.
That's a classic San Ramon accent right
It
there.
is. Yeah. No, my hometown is Plymouth in England, which you probably know is one of the major ports in the United Kingdom. My dad was in the Royal Navy, and so he's actually a Scot, and my mother's from Plymouth, and so they met and married there, and so I was born there. My other brother was born there as well, so that's my hometown. Although because we were a military family, we traveled a tremendous amount. I think I attended something like 16 schools when I was growing up.
Wow.
We would certainly be moving every 2 years, sometimes even more frequently than that. So we moved around to the different ports around the country with my dad. So my dad and his wife and the two boys in tow, and occasionally a dog. Although most of the time during my formative years, I was in Scotland. So on the west coast of Scotland, my father was in the Polaris program, the nuclear submarines. So most of the time was spent there, and so most of my education was there. Not entirely, but most of it.
What was that like, jumping from school to school for you?
Yeah, sort of a full range of emotions. First day, traumatic, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then
Many traumatic first days.
Yeah, but tons of traumatic first days. I think it's overwhelming. You can remember yourselves those first days of school, right? And a new school every year and a half, 2 years, which ended up making me get used to it. And I know we're going to talk about sport, and sport was sort of the savior, if you like, because no matter if you were the new kid, the short kid, the kid whose accent was different, once you got on the field, it didn't really matter so much. And so it's always been a big part of my life, sport. But yeah, we moved around a tremendous amount. But I think it helped. I think it was a good thing in the end. I don't know if it was self-confidence or just because I had to do it so many times to introduce myself and make new friends.
Yeah, that's a lot of experience in different places too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, lots of different experiences. From the southwest of England, where I did primary school, up to the far west coast of Scotland, where I did my secondary education. Very, very different, distinctly different places. And then, as I mentioned, my father was working in the nuclear program, and we were in the industrial northwest of England for a few years. And that was the industrial northwest of England, very blue-collar, working-class communities, tough, no nonsense. You get the edges knocked off, and yeah. So it was good.
When you first went off on your own, what age were you at, and what was the circumstances around you being, kind of the independent you for the first time? Was that university, or was that what was the circumstances?
Yeah. So we were living in Scotland, and I was finishing school. I was finishing school 15 and a half, 16 years old. I was not academically inclined. I was inclined to play all kinds of sports, but I was not particularly academically inclined, which turns out to be sort of amusing, right?
Yeah.
In the end, at the end of the story.
Oh, that's changed.
Right, a little bit. And so I was finished with school. And I traveled back down to my mother's hometown to start work. So between the ages of 16 and 24, I was just the working guy in the UK and then overseas as well, and playing sport in different parts of the world also. But yeah, I didn't start college until I was 24. Sort of a different path, and that was okay. It worked out.
Yeah. What did you do between 16 and 24 before you started college?
I worked in my hometown for about 4 years until I was about 20 with a company that worked with the Royal Navy.
Okay.
And so we sort of followed the Royal Navy around to different ports. And then at 20, I just decided to leave. I wanted to travel. So I came to Florida and I played some soccer in Fort Lauderdale. And then I went back to England, and then I came back to the United States, and I went to San Diego, and I played some soccer in San Diego. And then I went home again, and then I went to the Middle East. My dad, as I mentioned, and I'm looking over there because the folks can't see, but there's a cottage attached to our property, and we have an extended family. My parents lived with my wife and I here in Alamo. So they live in a little cottage there, and they're in their 80s now. But my dad had gone to work in the Middle East. Okay. While he was in the Royal Navy, I'd got certified as a diver with the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines.
Whoa.
And so I thought that it would be a bit of a lark to go out to the Middle East to live. And so I was a certified diver.
Yeah, where can you dive?
Yeah. And so I ended up working in the oil industry in oil exploration and salvage for a couple of years, which was interesting. A little dangerous, but very well paid. And the good thing about the Arabian Gulf is that it's not like working in the North Sea, which is tremendously cold and very deep. The Arabian Gulf is very warm and fairly shallow. So most of my time was spent just in scuba equipment. But yeah, so
wow,
I did that.
That is so. I had no idea about any of it.
Yeah. So yeah, I worked in the oil industry in Bahrain. So all in the Gulf, all around the Gulf: Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Dubai, that whole region. Yeah.
Okay, so then how do you make your way from scuba diving in the Middle East back into education?
Yeah, I know. So I'd also been playing rugby. So I think academically and sportively, my interests have always been eclectic. And I always played a broad range of sports. I suppose the main two were rugby and football, soccer. Mm-hmm. And I played them throughout my school life. And so when I arrived in the Middle East, I played both. A more significant experience was with rugby, playing for Bahrain, and we got to go on tours in the Far East, up to, for example, in Cairo, capital of Egypt. And I actually was a guest player for Cairo, and we came to the United States and played on the East Coast in the United States, which was very fun. But I got injured. So I injured my knee in Bahrain when I was playing there, and I needed treatment. And so there's an institution called the United States Sports Academy, which is headquartered in Mobile, Alabama. And a part of what they do is they provide, usually to developing world nations, coaches, sports medicine, physicians, athletic training staff.
Oh, wow.
So to bring on usually their Olympic programs, because that's very important in the developing world. So I got injured, and I had to go for treatment to the national stadium in Bahrain to get my knee seen to, and I was probably at this stage 23.
Okay.
So I'd got injured, and I walked into the training, what we would call in the United States, the training room, right? and lo and behold, I was surrounded by Americans. And we started talking about rugby and other sports. And so I asked them, how did you find yourself in Bahrain? And I found out that they were sports medicine types, let's just say it that way. And I think sort of a light bulb went off. I played serious sport my whole life, but probably for the first time then, almost certainly because I got injured, I thought, well, you won't play the whole of your life, but you love it so much. And then I was encountering these guys who had a career in sports. So that light bulb, I think, went on. And then before I knew it, I was in the Midwest at a university in the United States studying sports medicine.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So I just, I talked to these guys. They were great, very supportive. Fortunately, I had the credentials. I had just enough exams passed when I left school at 16 to get into, I went first to, there were 3 universities applied to, so I only applied to 3. It was different in those days, right? And the top 3 sports medicine programs were at Oregon State, Arizona State, and Indiana State. And Indiana State responded right away and said, you're in if you want to go. And I said, I'm not quite sure where Indiana is, but I'm in. And so before you know it, there I was in the freezing cold in Indiana. Yeah. And then Indiana was wonderful. The people were just wonderful. And I felt like I'd been adopted by multiple families, and they were really, truly super people to me. I don't want this to be disrespectful, but, and it was a terrific time. But I thought a lot of things, but I thought maybe I should go to California. I've heard a lot about it. Mm-hmm. And so I transferred out to California, finished up my undergrad, did my master's degree at St. Mary's College, not really knowing what was going to happen next. And then I did my PhD at Berkeley. Yeah.
What was that transition like? I mean, I'm thinking about how you had all these quick adaptations to different schools growing up, and now you just like got thrown back into the academic scene when you were 24. What was that first couple of years like?
I mean, Indiana to California must have been no big deal, right?
No, yeah, it's true. Yeah. No, it is true. Yeah. And I think what we were saying earlier about, in this case, my formative years, all that transitional stuff, and frequently, right, having to make new friends, adapt to a different home, different schools, different teachers all the time, probably served me well when I transferred from the heartland to the crazy left coast, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, what was the transition like? I'd never been, as I mentioned earlier, I'd never been particularly academically inclined. But when it had something to do with something that I was interested in, the human body, physiology, human performance, then I became interested. Mm-hmm. So school had never been hard for me. In fact, it was boring, and I never really paid attention. I didn't do homework. My students aren't going to hear it.
No. Okay. We'll cut that. It's all good.
So I was a poor student. I received passing grades, but I was just an uninterested student because I'd not found anything that intrigued me. But then I did at university. I didn't find it at all hard through my undergraduate years, through my master's program, and then I arrived at Berkeley. And that was different. Mm-hmm. That was different in all kinds of different ways. When you do a PhD at Berkeley, you don't just specialize. You do specialize, but you have to do it. There's a language requirement. Now, I had taken French in primary school in the UK. You can imagine it was pretty basic stuff. Killer-a-til, those kinds of things. And then all of a sudden I realized at the doctoral level at Berkeley, there's a language requirement. You must have a research language. It can be Russian if you'd like, or it can be German, or it can be French. Okay, so I'll do French. Well, that was a bit of a grind because I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to do my stuff. But no, you have to have a second language. And I needed to learn how to read, translate 19th century Victorian French prose into English. And so that took me a couple of years to get through that requirement.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is so.
Yeah. So Berkeley was tough. That was the first time at any educational institution that I was stretched. Yeah. Which is good, which is the way it should be, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that was probably a really good challenge at that time, because like you're getting back into that really deep interest of something and really applying yourself. And then it's like asking you, how bad do you want this?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And I did. And I remember distinctly the day that I passed my oral exams for the PhD. And it's right up there among the most important. I remember leaving the exam room, and I don't know if you know what happens for PhD oral exams. Okay, so they lock you in a room with anywhere between 3 to 5 senior faculty members. And at Berkeley, when I did it, it was a long oak table in the basement of one of the academic halls, and you could be there from anywhere between 2 to 4 hours. And so, and you practice. You have you have the mock exams, but then there's no getting away from it, and you have to pass.
Yeah.
And people don't always pass. And you can imagine, after having done 4 or 5 years at Berkeley in a doctoral program, and they say you failed, and that happens. Not very often, but it happens. So it's tense. And I remember walking away from campus to get in my car to come home to Margot, and I said to myself, now, don't get hit by a bus now. This would not be a good time after you've just passed your oral. You're going to be a PhD from Berkeley, right? No, it was a great place, and my program there was wonderful. I worked with a mentor. Sadly, she just died. Her name was Roberta Park, and she was an internationally known historian. So I had shifted to the humanities side of my field, which I love. I'd moved away from the sports medicine side and shifted to the principally to history. And so while I was at Berkeley, there were so many wonderful, and still are many wonderful historians. So I didn't just take coursework and do research in my own department. I was required to go and work with other faculty on campus. So it was sort of I think a high tide time at Cal in the history department when I was there. Leon Litwack was there, the great African American historian. Larry Levine was there in history, a modern American historian. To excuse my dog, sorry. Sheldon Rothblatt, British historian, and just all kinds of people. So I spent a bunch of time in history, and then also I did seminars in the School of Public Health at Berkeley with a wonderful, wonderful man. He has also just died. Seems to be a theme. Len Duell, actually a psychiatrist, but worked in the School of Public Health. He had been a part of the JFK administration.
Oh wow!
And he did a lot of important work. He was the father of what's called the Healthy Cities program, and so he'd worked with the United Nations as well. So a tremendous intellect, and so I was blessed to have time with him. And then I also did research in the Department of Near Eastern Studies with Ann Kilmer and Wolfgang Heimpel. And so I published some stuff on ancient Near East physical culture after working with them. So it was a fantastic time. And I got to go to college football games and watch the Golden Bears, on the weekend. So it was all this crazy academic stuff, and then that cathartic release kind of thing.
Yeah.
Up at Memorial Stadium on Saturdays.
Yeah. What do you think brought on the shift from the physical side to the humanities side?
I'd always been interested in history, even though I wasn't particularly academic. Sometimes people ask you, what did you want to be when you were growing up? Well, of course, I wanted to play for Manchester United, and that didn't quite happen. But But I've always been interested in archaeology, ancient archaeology. I was fascinated by, Egypt and the pyramids and ancient Greece, the Parthenon, and all that kind of stuff.
I've been recently getting into a bit of it myself. I'm still pretty novice, but like really fascinating stuff about the discovery of like sites like Göbekli Tepe and some of that stuff. It's just been super interesting to read. So maybe offline we can talk about more.
Sure.
Of that. Yeah.
One of the things that has been wonderful, and I landed at St. Mary's College, as you both know, which is just over the hill, from Berkeley, and it was terrific to be able to land there, because I joke, I suppose, that when you finish, people who are just finishing their PhDs are sort of like brand new minted quarterbacks, right? When you're playing at college, you kind of never know where you're going to end up. If you're a quarterback, you coming out of college, you might get drafted and play in Tennessee, or it might be Chicago. Or it might be San Diego. Well, not anymore, but Los Angeles or wherever, yeah? If you're going to play in the pros. When you finish your PhD, you don't know where the jobs are that year. You might be going to North Dakota State, or you might be going to the University of Florida, or you might be going to Wisconsin, or you might end up at St. Mary's College if you're really, really lucky. And Margot is a Bay Area woman, so we were able to stay here.
Was that connection since you did your master's there, or how did you end up following?
Yeah, so I left St. Mary's and went to Berkeley. So 2 years at St. Mary's and 5 years at Berkeley, and then they had an opening and they called.
Wow.
So I was like,
everything works out, right?
And I've loved it. I've been there for 25 years, and it's been tremendous. And what I was going to say is one of the really cool things about St. Mary's College, I think, for the undergraduates for certain, and also for the faculty, is what we call our January term program, which can be either in residence or it can be travel. So essentially what happens is every undergraduate is required to take 4 January terms. It's a month-long course of study on just one topic. So very intense for a month. And for the last, 8 years or whatever it is, I've taken students to Turkey, Greece, and Italy to look at the archaeological. Remember I said as a boy, I was interested in archaeology.
Yeah. Bringing it full circle.
Yeah. So we get to go to look at some of the great historical archaeological sites where ancient athletics, where ancient sport happened. So ancient Olympia. We get to run at ancient Olympia where the ancient Greek athletes ran in the first Olympics.
Wow.
We get to go to the Flavian Amphitheater. We call it the Colosseum, right there in the center of Rome, where the gladiatorial events took place, and we arranged for them to go underground to see where the animals and the gladiators, were sort of prepared to come up and put on this tremendous, as it turns out, political show, which we can talk about later. But and then we also went the first year. I took a Jan term group, take about 15 to 20 students with me for 2 to 3 weeks. So we're gone for most of the time. The first year I took the group, we went in through Istanbul to the site of ancient Troy.
Wow.
You remember the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So which is it's kind of difficult to get to, but it's really worthwhile. And so we one of the other things that we do with our undergraduate students at St. Mary's, they're all required to take 4 what we call collegiate seminars. So 1 a year, essentially. And it's a great books program. They read the great books of Western literature, all the way from the ancient Greeks right up to 20th, 21st century texts. And of course, we almost start with Homer's Odyssey. So the students got to read from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey on the ramparts of the reconstructed citadel of Troy. So, and one of my students was a classic student who because the Odyssey, the Iliad in the Odyssey, we think was usually sung rather than just spoken.
Oh, wow.
And so she sang some of the verses in ancient Greek as we stood at the site of ancient Troy.
Aren't those moments just so crazy when you're sitting there and you're realizing like you're in the place where something originated so far away and it's being performed in the way that it was probably most accurately heard in the time that it was created.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's amazing. Yeah. And she was crying as she was singing, by the way.
Wow.
So it meant something to her, at least.
Yeah.
No, and I think it touched everyone. And if you remember the movie, of course, there's the great battle scene, right? Where they come up from the ships up to the city of Troy. And as you stand on the ramparts there, you can see out toward the coast where, if there in fact was a Battle of Troy, a siege, that's where they would have been.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool, though. And so this is a piece of where you really dove into sport again still. You spoke about how you learned about the history of sport.
Yeah.
What was that kind of like?
It's sort of, being trained in history, there are all kinds of questions, right? And why do we care that this stuff happened sometimes millennia ago in the case of Troy, right? Why do we care? Well, I think there's knowledge for knowledge's sake, and I think that's valid in and of itself. So historians are trained to uncover the what happened, right? So we call it descriptive history, right? Describe what happened. Who was there? Who were the men, the women, and children who were involved? How many? Were they from the upper classes? Were they the working classes?
What was the date?
What was the date? Are there any remnants of the event still available to us? Those kinds of things, which is great and important. And I've written work that is purely descriptive in nature, just telling the story. Just telling the story of these now long dead people about what happened. The much more, I think, and that can be terrific. That can be great in and of itself on its own, right? This description of past events. But the crucial part for me always is the analytical. Why did these things happen? Why did these things happen? So why were people motivated in the case of Troy? Why did these allied Greeks travel so far to try to take this citadel that was Troy? What were their motivations? What was in it for them? Okay, so the analysis piece is crucially important, and then the other piece that I think is important too is to think about: is there anything to be learned from what happened and why in the past? Is there anything that we can learn and apply in our own situations from what has happened in the past?
Yeah.
I think.
I agree. I think that, there's no doubt that there's things that were known in the past that we've completely lost touch with, and that we need, some good analytical discovery on how we can bring those things back into our life, especially in an environment in today's culture and world where a lot of the things that maybe they had or were tapping into from a spirituality standpoint or physical standpoint are being numbed by technology or anything like that. So
it feels like what you started with is especially true, and that is this idea. And George Santayana, this Spanish-American philosopher, the famous quote, right? "Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it," is timely. So I wonder sometimes if a lot of the answers to these dire problems that we have today, that these problems existed before and were deeply thought about, and solutions may be found, but they've been forgotten. So I think the study of past human communities can be very worthwhile for lots and lots of reasons.
Yeah,
That's why I in part, that's why I enjoy it, I think. Because there is a pragmatic, practical aspect, or there can be, to it as well. I don't think that's the sole motivation, but I think it's important.
But yeah, that's not emphasized enough, it feels like.
Well, we were talking about that at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
When we were talking about a high school education and a college education, sometimes it's a matter of going through, checking the boxes, and then you don't really stop to think about, why am I learning this, all this stuff? Why are they quizzing me on this? Why are they testing me on this? And some of it might be just so that you can be a better citizen, so that you know about where responsibilities and freedoms meet, which seems timely.
Yeah. It's like we could know plenty of details. We can know the descriptive details about like the Civil War, but if we don't know why it occurred, then almost like, what's the significance of that?
Because I mean, today, and we're sitting here in mid-October 2020, and I don't know how you're feeling, but I think a lot of Americans are feeling nervous. You mentioned the Civil War. I mean, I don't think there's going to be another Civil War. I don't know how that would look. I think it would be disastrous, of course, violence on that scale. But I think there's a tremendous amount of tension and anxiety in our country. I mean, and you're a young man. I don't know where your heads are with this. For me, I feel very, very concerned about some of the things that I see happening in our country. And I'm an immigrant, you know, and a citizen, an American by choice. And I'm alarmed at some of the things that I've seen just in the last couple of weeks. So I don't know where you are and your age cohort are with things.
I think it's very similar to speak for myself, at least, just to hear that like that is getting brought up more, that there are talks of like a civil war.
Failed state is a term I've heard thrown around, like the United States is like on their decline. And, you know, I don't know all the validity behind those types of statements, but I mean, we're not doing well.
I was especially, I think dismayed. I was dismayed. I mean, just this week, was it, or the end of last week, when this plot was uncovered to capture, put on trial, and maybe execute a governor of one of our major states, one of Mr. Trump's political opponents
in Michigan, right?
In Michigan. And I found that to be especially alarming, that there are paramilitary militia groups who would even consider planning something like that. You know, to take action against duly elected politicians, representatives of the people, is alarming. And I mentioned my Jan term trips, and we spend a lot of time in Greece, and I've had the great good fortune of making friends around the world. And of course, I know mostly Americans here, but the Bay Area is a diverse and cosmopolitan part of the world, and there are lots of people from lots of different places around the world here in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. So I have tons of folks who weren't born here. One of my good friends, Lefteris, is Greek, and he grew up in the 60s and 70s when Greece was controlled by a military junta. And guess where he is now? He's here, you know, he's here in the United States. I was alive during the British-Argentine War in the late 70s, early 80s, ostensibly over the Falkland Islands. But there was an international coalition formed because a military junta, again, had taken over a democratically elected country. And forgive me if my Argentine history isn't, you know, fully up to speed, but an international coalition, I think, was petrified by the very idea that a military government could replace a democratically elected government. And it's concerning because there's real echoes of the past here. You know, there's real echoes of the past. And I've heard, I experienced it firsthand with Argentina and the UK, and then talked to Lefteris about, heard about the what it was like in Greece and how so many people fled. One can imagine.
Yeah.
And then I talked to Holocaust survivors who talked about what it was like in Germany in the 1930s when an elected politician, remember Adolf Hitler, elected to power by the citizens, the free citizens of Germany, which was an incredibly sophisticated modern state in the 1930s. Of course, it was handicapped by the hangover that was World War I, but nonetheless a place of high culture, right? Engineers, artists, novelists, and then it changed. And I've talked to these Holocaust survivors, and they said, "Be on guard. Be on guard. It can change very quickly. It can change very quickly."
I mean, Portland and Seattle are two great examples of other situations where it's something you would think would be so, like, you'd think it'd be written in a story and not really happen, where, people, from what I heard was, obviously what happened in Seattle, the militia group took over a few blocks and, people were killed in that circumstance. And then also I think it was the mayor of Portland was being his life was being threatened as well, and they came to his apartment building and trashed his lobby or whatever.
And people were disappeared, right? People were bundled into the back of SUVs and were just taken off the streets.
Yeah.
So this is America, and again, there's echoes of the past. There's echoes of the past. And, in Nazi Germany, political opponents disappeared and were killed. Groups became identified as the dangerous other, and there was a solution. I don't know how it is for young people, but for me, it's alarming, the place we've arrived.
It is. And just to know that the statement, history repeats itself, exists, shows that, before Adolf Hitler, there was something similar that we probably could have learned from.
Yeah.
If we really applied and understood
history. And
again, it's almost a cycle.
Yeah.
And it is alarming. Just to hear you really emphasize those words from those Holocaust survivors is scary, because this stuff does seem, I mean, that night, when in 2016, when Donald Trump got elected, it felt like it was like that, that things changed. And it's a weird time, especially right now with everything. I stop to think, and I'll ask somebody, I'll be like, can you just stop and think about what's going on in our life right now?
Yeah.
We would have never imagined this 5 years ago, last year.
Yeah. It does seem very changed. And for me, it's become actually intensely personal, because the rhetoric that I've been hearing coming out of this administration and some of the actions at our southern border are alarming. My wife is Mexican-American. She's a brown person, which makes my son half brown. They're the other. For many Americans, they are the other, and that scares me. And we should not be here. We should not. And I think there's a real heavy responsibility on your generation's shoulders now. I think 18 to 25-year-olds, only 40-something% of that age cohort voted in the last election.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens again, I think two things. It could be disastrous for the next 4 years for the nation and our relationships with other nations, progressive democracies. But if that does happen, sometimes you get what you deserve,
Mm-hmm.
which might seem harsh to say, but
It's true.
if you don't vote.
Yep. I mean, we were in I've heard the statement before, maybe that Donald Trump wasn't the president that we wanted, but he's the president that we needed to wake us up and get us back
Or
on track
deserved,
deserved.
Yeah,
President
yeah.
we deserved, to get us back on track to realizing, maybe reassessing some of our values and what's important and where we need to be putting our efforts towards, rebuilding the United States as a community of people who are also, a power state
Sure.
or a place in the world. And yeah, I agree. I think, our generation does need to start reevaluating where we're headed, because it's going to be a lot on our shoulders, and we're going to be raising the next generation below us, and we need to make sure that they have the right values to continue to take us forward. And there's a lot of weight, but I'm also optimistic.
Good.
Because, I've met so many incredible people that I can't not be. And I believe in the power of humanity. And I think that we just have a few outliers out there that, bad apple attempting to spoil the bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, I think.
And they're very loud right now.
Yeah. but there is a way out.
God bless your optimism. I think is tremendous. And let's have that optimism come through in the next couple of weeks, because we're running out of time on a significant number of these issues. And I think anyway, for a lot of young people, my students, when I talk to them, one of the big things on their radar, one of the big blips on their radar is climate change.
Mm-hmm.
The science that is climate change does not seem to be resonating in the halls of power right now. There seems to be denial of that science. I suspect I know why, right?
There may be a little money behind it.
There might be. But I don't think we have very much longer left to seriously address this this catastrophe that is coming.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, even just I don't know the exact stat, but there was some kind of incredible statistic brought up when after like 2 weeks of quarantine in Los Angeles County, with the decrease in carbon emissions just in the air and the quality of the air in the city, just from 2 weeks of limited driving.
Remarkable, right?
Mm-hmm. Remarkable.
Yeah.
And if we can't look at that and be
there's your optimism.
Right. There it is. It's coming back through.
Keep it coming, Brendan.
Yep. Yeah. We need to take that data point and be like, okay, there's something there, and people need to start really exploring it and talking about it more.
Yeah. And it might be that people feel it is so overwhelming that they don't know where to start. And exactly what you said, I think, that's very persuasive. Mm-hmm. Look, just over the course of 2 weeks, you can see the sun. You can breathe better. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this goes back to the whole history thing, though. If we're not going to make a step to do something, it's just going to stay this way for a while, and then it might repeat itself until there's actually some type of firm change.
Yeah. Feels like it.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like it.
So amidst all this, I wanted to ask, what is the role of sport, and especially how the role of sport has played since COVID too? What are your thoughts just about everything regarding that?
Yeah, what does sport intentionally or unintentionally have a role in a democracy or a community of people? What has its roles been in the past? Is there anything to learn from what has happened in the past? You know, one of the things that we see maybe I hear and see it all the time is folks say things like, I know a lot of people are disappointed in the NFL right now. A lot of people, and they're not watching it. I'm told. I don't know. I haven't looked at the data. And when you ask them, they say, "I'm done. It's too political for me. Let's keep what? Let's keep sport and politics apart. Can't we just have a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, right?" Which is sort of silly, as it turns out, because sport has always been a political vehicle from the very, very beginning. You remember I said that I take students to Greece in some Januaries, not every January, and we visit Olympia, ancient Olympia, the archaeological site of ancient Olympia, and that was a key site in Greek antiquity. It really was pivotal in Greek civilization. What happened over the course of about a week when the program was at its longest, the ancient Olympic program was at its longest, maybe 5 days, was incredibly important to the Greeks for lots and lots of reasons, religious reasons, military reasons, cultural reasons, but also is very, very important to politicians, kings, tyrants. And they would themselves, if they could, compete and try to win at Olympia, or send representatives on their behalf to Olympia to try to win. And if they won, they would mint special gold or silver coins with their likeness as king on one side, and then, of course, the famous olive wreath of victory on the other side. And that would be the coin of the realm it would use. And so they were making a statement, a political statement, intentionally. Because those original games, those original Olympic Games were very martial in nature, military in nature. And to win, you had to be very big, strong, fast. You know, you had to have physical prowess, right? And so if you could win, you were sending a very clear message. Remember I said I did research in the Department of Near Eastern Studies. One of the societies that I studied was ancient Sumer, one of the earliest human civilizations, actually famous for the first civilization to use writing as we would know it. And they were a system of a monarchy system. And king in the ancient Sumerian language literally translates as big man. And so you became king if you were the biggest, strongest, fiercest warrior. And so the tyrants of ancient Greeks performing and winning in these games, which were martial and military in nature, were sending a very clear statement to other Greek city-states.
We're bigger.
And stronger. Imagine what I can do. If I can win this spear throwing contest or chariot race or wrestling contest, imagine what our military's like.
Yeah.
Don't mess with us. But perhaps even more importantly, the political message that was being sent home was intended to cement the king or the tyrant's position. We know this, right? As Americans, we know this. There's a little survey done by Sports Illustrated. It asked Americans, which was the most important sport history event in U.S. history. And it was one event that most Americans identify, overwhelmingly, one event. Disney made a movie about it. It was during the Winter Games.
Oh, the Miracle.
The Miracle on Ice,
yep.
Right? The Miracle on Ice, where our college kids defeated
the Russian,
the Soviets,
or the Soviet,
right?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, not everybody thinks it was the championship game. It wasn't. It was a semifinal game. They had to go on and beat Finland, but it was a really tough time in the United States, right? Late 70s, gas rationing, a real economic downturn. And these young college kids do the unimaginable against the mighty Soviets. It's sort of the late Cold War era. They were our big enemy, not just in sport, but in economics and military, right? And our college kids beat them. What a moment. It was this patriotic moment that brought us all together. This wave of good feeling, right? Same thing used to happen in antiquity. When your athletic representatives do well, and think about our own colleges teams or our hometown team, if they do well, there's this wave of good feeling throughout
People are
the
filled
community.
with pride.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And so, and that cements the position of the status quo. In this case, in antiquity, the king. So he's sending political messages all over the place by competing and winning, perhaps himself or a representative of his administration, we'll say it that way. So sport has been political forever. Forever. It's politics and sport have been intertwined forever. Roman emperors, during the time of the Roman emperor in the early centuries AD, if you had been alive in the imperial capital of Rome, with the two biggest sporting venues, and one of them really still survives. If you ever go to Rome, I don't know if you've been to Rome, but you got to go to the Colosseum.
I've been,
right?
Yeah.
And it's right
Amazing.
it is right in the heart of the imperial city.
Yeah.
It's right in the center, and right next, just a short walk away through the Forum, is the Circus Maximus, where the chariots used to run. And then Caesar's residence is above it, right? This is the imperial center. And right at the imperial center of Rome are two sporting venues. The place for the chariot races and the gladiatorial contest, which was sort of the they were the sporting heroes, if you like. They were infamous. They weren't really famous because they occupied a very low social class. They could never escape their social rank. In fact, they were very separate from ordinary Romans. But the emperors provided to the people, the ordinary slum-dwelling Roman, free bread, free dole, the grain dole they called it, and free public entertainment. And hundreds of days in the year. They could go to theatrical performances for free. They could go watch the gladiators, the animal hunts in the Flavian Amphitheater. They could go and watch the circus, the chariots race. And they weren't alone. We have records, and I think this is an exaggeration, but we have records of 500,000 Romans cramming into the Circus Maximus to watch chariot races.
Wow.
Probably more like 250,000, but still pretty impressive, right? But those citizens were entering into a political agreement with the emperor. There was an exchange going on here. They called it a munera, an exchange. The emperor provides you with free food and free entertainment to fill up your days, and in exchange, you are obedient subjects. Sport has always, always, always been political. We talked about Adolf Hitler. 1936, Berlin, the so-called Nazi games, right? A propaganda political message being sent to the world about the Aryan power of the German people. And of course, we know what's coming next, right? Soon thereafter, within 3 years, World War II starts, in Europe anyway. but not just a message being sent to the world about Aryan superiority. Look at our youth. Look at our Aryan youth. Aren't they superb? And they were superb. They won. There's not an official IOC medal count, but it's an unofficial sort of press medal count. But they won the medals going away, the Germans. They were superb. They were superb. Except there was one little wrinkle. And his name was Jesse Owens. We can talk about that later on. But the message was clearly sent about the power of this re-emerging giant nation. And Hitler purposely chose sport to be the political vehicle. He also did the same things as Greek tyrants had done and Roman emperors had done. He used this tidal wave of good feeling about Aryan victory in the Olympic Games to cement his position with the German people. Very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Sport and politics always, always, always been intertwined. So to suddenly say in the early 21st century, I don't like sports and politics mixing. It's
too
silly.
late for that.
It's silly.
Yeah.
It's silly. It's silly. I mean, it's usually used by those in power to try to project or maintain power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's probably what people are objecting to, actually. Bob Costas has a quote, Bob Costas, right, the NBC announcer. He has a quote, and he goes, it's not really that people object to sport and politics mixing. It's really that we object to you making political statements in sport that we don't agree with. That's really what the problem is. It's not. Everybody knows that sport is, and always, not everybody knows, but sport is a political vehicle.
Yeah, but people would agree with it if they were spreading the message that they wanted to be spread, and they'd be okay with it.
Well, that happens all the time. I mean,
not exclusive to sport.
Yeah,
that's every venue for somebody, preaching their message.
Well,
right.
Yeah, but I mean, I think sport is probably the most visible. I keep on using the word vehicle, but it seems to fit. I mean, sport is this vehicle, and it's incredibly. I mean, it's omnipresent, isn't it? And there's no escaping sport.
Yeah.
I mean, when we used to read some interesting research done, media research done, when we used to read newspapers, we don't really read newspapers anymore, but 85% of males who opened a newspaper in the morning turned to guess which section first. Not business, not the front page, the sports section. There's no escaping it. It used to be one ESPN. ESPN started broadcasting in 1979, and it was ESPN. Today it's
ESPN,
everything.
ESPN2, ESPN3,
ESPN Classic, ESPN Deportes,
ESPNU for the university. I mean,
right? Yeah, it's and which is sort of symbolic. It's you can't. It's 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. It's
always on.
It's always on. There's no escaping it. It seems to me.
So today, where do you think, as far as to bridge the politics, sports, and like today's culture, where do you think with some of the major issues we're dealing with today, sports can, I'm going to use that optimism again, where do you think sports can be making a positive impact? And do you think they're doing a good job?
Oh, okay.
Because there's been a lot of initiatives, like with the NBA and the jerseys and...
well, we would, and actually we do. We like to embrace the mythology of sport, right? We like to, and I talk with my undergraduate student, and sometimes it's a tough road because my home department is kinesiology. And so if a student is interested in exercise science, if a student is interested in a career in the sport industry, it's quite often the case that those students have, in their formative years, have had a lot of experiences with sport, like from youth sport, interscholastic, and even intercollegiate sport. And certainly if they have found themselves playing at a high level in their high schools or their clubs and then at college, that means almost certainly for most of their life, they got lots of positive psychological strokes from being, they were good. And they got a lot of positive feedback.
Yeah.
It made them feel good about themselves and about the sport and about their coaches and the travel they did, right? And so usually most people just love to embrace that mythology of sport, that it is sport participation is unequivocally positive. That it, for example, builds good character, which I don't agree with. And the research absolutely doesn't agree with that. Okay, so for every example of you could give me of good, whatever that means, pro-social behavior in sport, I'll come up with a counterexample of antisocial bad behavior by an athlete. Nick, you and I have seen some of them on the field, in person, in high school sport, right? Violence. High school players stamping on the necks of their opponents, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that good character? Lance Armstrong. Yeah. Knowingly took what? Banned and illegal drugs to try to win. Does sport
and then did a ton of lying about it.
And then did a ton of lying and tried to destroy the lives of those who were just telling the truth. Does sport build good character?
Builds ego.
Might.
Can.
And
which can be a very bad thing.
And if you are a high, and one of the worst things to be as an athlete is to be a singularly high ego athlete, because it leads to the withdrawal of effort, things like faked injury and cheating. You want to be high ego and high task if you can be. Right? That's what the research says. That's where the best athletes are. That's where the best athletes are. They're not sense. All other reference. That I assess myself on how I do against others. That's how I decide whether I'm good or not. Right? That can be very problematic in youth and for young people. It can be. The truth is that sport participation, the research bears this out over and over again. Sport, the consequences of sport participation are equivocal. It depends. It depends on the norms of behavior that are established by the coaches, for example. And there's some fascinating research, since you wanted to ask me an optimistic research. And there's some seminal research. Sheriff and Sheriff did the famous Robbers Cave study back in the 1950s. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's really cool. It's group dynamics research. And what they did is they took a bunch of boys, I think they were 12, during the 1950s and the 60s. The old summer camp thing was very big. You know, kids used to go off to camp for the summer. I mean, that still happens sometimes. So they picked up these bunch of boys, bussed them to this camp, Robbers Cave camp in the Midwest, and had them and put them into teams and had them bonding with one another, okay, doing all kinds of team activities, and they bonded these boys, and they gave their teams names, the Rattlers, you know, the Eagles. And then the researchers, Sheriff, set up this competitive between group scenario. Things like tug of war, baseball, okay. Carefully constructed, vigorous competition for one prize, a scarce commodity, okay. So there could be, and there was friction, one prize, one winner, everybody else losers, okay, one prize. Vigorous competition, friction up to and including physical violence between the 12-year-olds who had never met, okay? But when this hyper-competitive environment was established by the researchers, we saw this friction and up to and including violence, and the kids had to be separated by the researchers the camp supervisors. And then Sheriff does something really interesting, which is going to lead to an optimistic answer.
There you go.
Really, and you'll be able to relate to this. Both of you, I know, played on sport teams as you were growing up, and you can relate to this part. Sheriff then introduces what's called a superordinate goal. Superordinate goals can only be accomplished if individuals or groups work together cooperatively to achieve the task, to conquer the task. So the two teams that had previously been at each other's throats were given this superordinate goal. They bonded together previously, and they achieved their goals, and so much so that at the end of the study, they all wanted to go back together home on the same bus. They were buddies, right? One of the things that I don't think we do a good enough job of when it comes to sport is explaining sport's true potential. Not that it automatically works like this, but Nick, you remember you played at De La Salle High School, right?
Mm-hmm.
De La Salle High School is a diverse community. Boys coming from all kinds of backgrounds, right? Faith traditions, certainly economic background.
Mm-hmm.
You have kids from very affluent families, and then you have kids who are living below the poverty level. So all kinds of different children, right? Minors. Who come together on these athletic teams at De La Salle and lots of other great educational institutions too. They are presented with what Sheriff would say is a superordinate goal. We can only win EBAL, the championship, if we what? Put aside all our differences, find our commonalities, and work together. That doesn't mean that all of you are going to be on the field for every game, but you have a role. And we can move together. And I think if you blow this up a little bit, it's really timely for our nation.
It is spot on left and right.
Right? We are an incredibly diverse nation made up of people from, who their national origin is different, their faith traditions are different, their socioeconomics are different, ethnicity, race, you name it. Right? Urban, suburban, male, female, name it, whatever it is. But it requires leadership, a great head coach, a superordinate goal or goals that we can achieve together by cooperating. It doesn't feel like where we are right now.
Yeah. That superordinate goal is not agreed upon, and it's really not defined.
No. I think we've arrived at a place in the United States. I teach at a Catholic college. Nick, Brendan, you both went to a Catholic high school. My son went to a Catholic high school. My son started at a public high school. There were probably many reasons why he left there and ended up at De La Salle, which was a joy. But I think we have to hark back to Sheriff again and the Robbers Cave study. I think what has happened in the United States, we've arrived at a place where hyper-competitiveness, individualism has become valued above everything else. It is every man and woman for themselves, and if you can't succeed, too bad for you. That's not community. That's not community, and but I just see it. I just see it, and I think we need a change of course. Good leadership is required. Valuing community is required, I think.
To bring it kind of back to your the ancients, if I may, I've been recently reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Right.
And he speaks very often of the idea of the hive and how
he does.
How people must contribute to the hive and every bee is essential to the hive. And I don't think we have that mindset as a nation right now, to your guys' point.
No.
People don't feel like they're contributing, and it's creating this, lone wolf instead of a beehive mindset. And I think that there's, he was an emperor of Rome, and he was a leader and a Stoic philosopher. And that was as a leader, having that mindset and seeing every person as valuable and really bringing everybody together like that, I think is, I'm in very much so agreement that that's something sorely missing but I think vital to how we're going to correct a lot of the issues.
And what's fascinating, and if you were a St. Mary's undergraduate, you read Marcus Aurelius, his Meditations, which is tremendous stuff. Mm-hmm. Of course, Marcus Aurelius is criticized. Remember, he was an emperor of a slave, a slave-owning empire.
Yes.
But your point is very well taken. How do we have workers in a capitalist society and not alienate them and make them feel that they are just very small cogs in a wheel, tiny bees in a beehive and insignificant? It's a great question about an individual's worth in a community, how that is assigned. And there's a tremendous amount of talk, I think, going on about this now, and there are some really pretty clear markers when it comes to value. In the old days, a CEO would earn, I don't know, 100 times what one of his line workers might take home in a year, right? Now it's thousands and thousands. I don't know. Is that good? Is that okay?
Doesn't seem like it.
Is it okay that a basketball player makes, I don't know, what are the numbers?
20
million, 20 million a year, and a firefighter makes, well, it depends where you live in the US.
Not that.
Is that
right.
is that where we are? I don't know.
Yeah. We could, the CEOs and the athletes, if we took down how much they were making, they would still be okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the comedy of it, is that, it's that tug of war between the capitalist, efforts of the country and thinking about it as a beehive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the individualistic culture, I feel like growing up, I was taught that that's the culture that we're in, yet it was just accepted. It is promoted in a sense.
It is.
That you need to do this because you need to get to this certain spot for yourself.
Well, but that's also one of the functions of sport in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't want us to talk about modern American society and not realize that, the vast majority of American children are enrolled by their parents for some pretty clear reasons in youth sport. I mean, tens and tens of millions of them every year into youth sport, right? Almost whether they like it or not, they're going to be in it. And they're going to be in team sports usually, and early. I mean, by age 6, something like 70% of boys are on a sport team, which is sort of telling. Now, why are they there? Why do their parents enroll them and sometimes spend a ton of money on this? And why do we dress them up like major leaguers when they're playing pee-wee? I don't know. Yeah. Somebody's making money out of this is probably the answer. But why is youth sport, and has been certainly for most of the 20th century, things like Little League and pee-wee football were introduced in the 1920s and 1930s. Why are they such a big part of our culture? And I think, in part, the answer is that sport is a socializing vehicle. It is intended to teach children the way our society works. It's intended to teach the core values, like competitiveness, actually winning. That's what it's about. Yeah. It's less about the competition. It's more about being a winner, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to be a loser. You want to be a winner. So it's about learning how to win. And then so we know in a capitalist society that being competitive, winning is highly, highly valued, and that there are some approved ways in our society that you can win, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to do? You have to be industrious. You have to be committed. So in the youth sport context, it's like, even though you might want to go and watch a movie or hang out with your friends, you're on this team, mister, and you're going to show up. You're committed. And you're going to, when you go to practice, you're going to work really hard. Okay? And you'll get better and you'll be a winner, right? Sacrifice for the group. That's learned in sport, right? Yeah. I think.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I think so.
You know, sometimes if you're in a baseball situation and you're in like a youth team, you could maybe hit a home run, but sometimes it's not the right thing to do. You have to sacrifice the chance of getting that personal glory for the team and move the runner around, right?
Throw down a bunt.
And that carries over, I think, into ordinary everyday life, right?
Yeah.
That's so true.
And so I think youth sport is really an important vehicle that teaches our society's values and the behaviors that you need to get on. That's a Victorian term. The Victorians always use. It's important to get on, to achieve, to be better than the previous generation, to be a winner. Okay, and so we socialize children, much more boys, by the way. Girls are much less involved, more now than ever, but girls are much less involved in youth sport than our boys. And of course, we socialize them into certain sports and not into others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You really can't have girls doing rugby, for example.
Right.
It's too rough. Too rough for them.
Yeah.
It's too rough. We don't want them doing football. Why not? It's too rough. Come on. Not really.
Yeah.
Because you can't have girls doing foot, right? I was a rugby player most of my life. Rugby for me and for lots of, it was a rite of passage, right? It's where I went when I was a young male to what? Establish and prove my masculinity. It's true, right?
Yeah.
And there's rites of passage in America too, baseball for boys, right?
Yeah.
Now, what happens if girls start playing rugby? Where am I going to go? When they start, what am I going to do if they do my stuff? Where do I go to establish my and prove my masculinity if a girl can do it? Doesn't that make rugby feminine? If girls can. So we're not going to have that. And forever, females have been what? Socialized into sports that you can play in a skirt, right? Like tennis. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but generally, it's true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's true. And so we reinforce gender roles through youth sport. We socialize boys towards certain sports and behaviors, and girls into volleying at the baseline in tennis or ice skating. I'm generalizing, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And it's been like this way for generations. And in fact, not until very recently were there hardly any opportunities. I mean, talk to your grandmothers for women to play interscholastic or intercollegiate sport in the United. Not really until 1972 when Title IX is passed, which is just extension of the Civil Rights Act that says you may not discriminate on the basis of sex when it comes to programming in educational institutions in the U.S.
A lot of people think that's a NCAA rule. It's a federal law.
It is,
and it's just applied.
And it's civil rights legislation.
Yeah. And it's just applied at the collegiate level that way. But yeah,
just exactly. The athletic department is a unit of the university, just like the Department of History, right? Just like the HR department. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex. But we do in intercollegiate athletics. But we do. There has, and the penalty for if an athletic department is shown to be discriminating on the basis of sex, say in intercollegiate athletics, the big punishment is they get their federal funds withdrawn, which is a death sentence, essentially. How many universities have ever had that happen to them since 1972? Are they all in compliance?
No, there's no way.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
What do you think about the difference in, as you know, comparing individual sports versus team sports, specifically for youth, and maybe more of like the benefits of an individual sport as somebody getting to not have anybody to blame but themselves and kind of work on themselves in that way, like struggle with losing at your own fault, and then comparing that to somebody maybe who's getting in straight into team sports and maybe hasn't worked on. Do you think that there's anything, any benefits to one way versus the other?
Well, so the way I want to answer that is to say, first of all, I'm not a sports psychologist, but I do have an opinion about it.
Yeah.
More of a lay opinion than a professional opinion. I think maybe I think what you're suggesting is that there might be more advantages in individual sports
At a young age,
Yeah.
I guess maybe.
I'm actually not so sure about that these days.
Okay.
Because I think what has happened to team sports is that it's become very specialized, and that in essence, of course, there's still team sports, and there's maybe a bunch of people in the pool or a bunch of people on the court with you or on the grass or on the field, right? But what I've seen happen in modern sport is that team sports is that the responsibilities of the positions have become more and more and more specialized. And if you're not sure about that, there are some team sports. You just look at the players and you know what their responsibilities are, right? More and more and more. So it's almost like, at least the way I think about it, it's almost like that you have a collection of individual athletes, right, playing in a team sport.
Yeah.
That's sort of a
No, I definitely see
not
what
a great
you're
answer, but yeah. But I think I can cut both ways. So if you have success, if you're in an individual sport and you have a lot of success, you could feel could be great for your self-esteem. But if you lose,
right.
Yeah, it goes the other way. So it's this. If my students could do, here he goes again. You know, he's hammering away on that equivocal word again. It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really depends. When it comes to sport, I think it's dangerous to be unequivocal. It really, sport participation, it depends. Depends on the environment, established goals set, those kinds of things.
I wanted to go back to the current political climate and sport.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to hear you lay out how politics has been so intertwined with sport for so long. Talking about how different sports have made comments politically.
Yeah.
I was telling Brendan that this has been something in international football for so long, the say no to racism.
Sure.
But yeah, here in the US, it's definitely way more emphasized now. Do you think that there's a responsibility that they have to do so? And then I was talking to Brendan last night too. What happens in a year? Like, do these names get taken off the jerseys?
Right.
Do we just go back to normal? And then what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems to me that it is pretty recent that there has been this mass athlete involvement. That the majority, and in some cases all of the athletes, are standing together, which is not entirely popular, as we know, in our nation today. And I think it's fair to say that many athletes who started out as members and residents of marginalized communities, often communities of color, when, not all, but when they made it, they left. They left and they didn't come back. Of course, there are exceptions to that, and that they did not take. Again, not all of these high-profile athletes, but these high-profile athletes are corporations, and I've heard it said in many different ways. I'm selling. I'm an athlete, but I'm selling sneakers. I'm selling T-shirts as well. And so if I take a political position as a Tiger Woods or a Michael Jordan, that's likely, and I think this is more true than ever, that's likely to what? Alienate 50% of the population, which is actually 50% of potential customers. So I'm an individual, I'm an athlete, but I'm also a corporation. So I may have very strong feelings about it, but I'm not going to publicly state them. Does that make them bad people? Does that make them? I've heard athletes called much worse than that. Athletes of color who have not been visible supporters of their communities and are geographically distant, but also socially, intellectually distant as well. Do they have a responsibility? That's a tough one.
Depends.
It's a tough one. It's a really, really tough one. Does do protests? To be candid, do protests by basketball players and baseball players, are they really going to make a difference to the major structural issues that we have in this country?
Is the kind of you're taking the position I took with my conversation with Nick yesterday, which was great, love it, do it, but that's not really what this is about. It's not about X, Y, and Z basketball player putting a nice, supportive thing on their jersey, and there's a much deeper problem that's not being solved by that action. So I'm with you on that.
I teach a course, and the title of the course is Sport and Social Justice. And what we do is we work with a collection of organizations mostly in Oakland, some great places doing some tremendous work. East Oakland Boxing Association, Soccer Without Borders, and others. And, our students go on site and see what's going on. And these are tough parts of Oakland. Okay. And these organizations are trying to use sport to get kids off the street, to get them involved with tutoring programs, to get them to understand about nutrition, to get them to try to finish high school, to try to help find the mentors so that they won't have contact too early with the criminal justice system, and on and on and on and on and on, and all those to try to mitigate and find solutions to these problems in the inner city, which is great. But is it? Is that a Band-Aid? Are we expending our time and energy in the right place? Now, it's hard to say it's not good because you're making a difference in the individual life of a immigrant Latina in West Oakland, right? Through soccer, she could find a mentor and a team, help her learn English more quickly, and all those things. But is it really addressing the structural challenges that inner city America has? Having to do with things like food insecurity, the presence of gangs and drug use and interpersonal violence that can be really attacked from a meta scale. sometimes it feels like we work from the wrong end. We're trying to band-aid and take, help individuals, which is worthy and moral, but
surface.
Should we be up
Yeah.
here? Is that should we be working with legislators, with politicians, rather than working down here at grassroots? Or do we have to do both? Or so I take your point.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Duff out because he's
Of course.
messing up your thing. Is he okay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah, people love that.
Check it out. Hello.
Hey, I know you just want to be out here.
Part of the fun.
Is that fire on? No.
No, I don't think so.
I just see what looks like flames.
Yeah. I think our light is kind of...
What do you want to do? A few more minutes, guys? How are you feeling?
Yeah, we can do like a few more minutes to start.
Anything else? What did we talk about?
Is there anything that you put on the agenda or you had written down some notes on you wanted to share?
What?
We do always one follow-up question as well. So at the end, we'll circle back to that. But
sure. No, I think.
What you've said has been awesome.
Yeah, I think you shared some really valuable perspective.
You're welcome.
The stuff that I've never really thought about, or really pieced together. I think
that thing, the thing that we were talking about earlier, Nick, is personal for me. We talked about football, the English football, and the comparison between professional soccer here and there and professional sport. I mean, football, the English Premier League, of course, is king in the UK. It is the professional sport, so it's the equivalent of, by lots of measures, the NFL is king here.
Yeah.
With the greatest respect to baseball and basketball people, and basketball is pushing, but NFL is pretty much where it is. But I just love thinking about, that the irony of American professional sports, and I was talking to my son Jack about that, who, he works for the now Las Vegas Raiders, and the irony that in the self-described foremost capitalist nation in the world, we essentially have socialized professional sports, right? A team like Las Vegas, God bless them, which has for many, many seasons out of the last 2 decades really been poor, and finishing last in their division, still gets to share revenue with the top performing teams. They can't fail. Whereas in the Premier League in England, if you fail 1 year, you're relegated down to the next level.
And it's a dogfight. It's no joke.
Dogfight. Yeah.
It's a 3-3 swap every year, right?
It depends on the leagues, but at the top level, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's wild, right?
Yeah.
It's a hell of an investment if you can get a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a constantly winning game.
So, I mean, there's competition weekend to weekend, but really, you can't lose if you own a professional franchise. You're not going to get relegated. There's nowhere to go. You get to, and then they try to level the field a bit with the draft thing.
Yeah. You play terribly, you get number 1 pick.
Which is sort of weird.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, kind of to the point we were making earlier too. If your team gets relegated, drastic loss in your financial investment in that circumstance, right? Your team could be worth millions, and then you go down a league and you're, what's the value of that team anymore? But in the American football, you're constantly going up, and it's protected by the league because money's coming in, merchandise gets sold, all that stuff.
Well, what Nick will tell you also is that if it were only that some of these giant teams, when they drop down one division, stay there and then come back up. Sometimes they go down 2 and 3, and it might take 20 years to reemerge at the top level.
Leeds
United, yeah. So that will have an impact on the value of your investment.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is pretty... It's ironic.
Yeah.
It's very strange to think about.
It is strange to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we wanted to kind of end with this last question of, I mean, I think when I think of the field of kinesiology, I think very specifically about like the human body almost.
Sure.
And it's so cool to hear that your work has been widely applicable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this question is a wide question. And if you were to give kind of a piece of advice to someone who is maybe in their early 20s or just has an interest in pursuing something in the realms of what your work has been in, like what would you kind of advise?
You know, I mentioned earlier that I've been at St. Mary's College for 25 years, and the shape of my home department is not the same as when I arrived. So I had some role in shaping it as it's over these last 2 or 3 decades. It seems like a long time. And so we've arrived at a place now at a liberal arts college, remember, this idea of breadth of offerings. We've arrived at a place now where we have 3 tracks for that hypothetical person in their 20s. If they matriculate at St. Mary's College and they're interested in kinesiology, they have a decision to make. And it's which of the 3 tracks am I going to specialize in while I'm studying kinesiology? And your 3 choices are this: exercise science that you started with coursework like exercise physiology, for example. And students go on to work in a broad range of professions if they graduate with us in the exercise science track. They might become exercise physiologists, maybe working over in John Muir Hospital. You know, if you come in and you have to do a stress test on a treadmill, if you've had some chest pain or something, that would be the person that would put you through that test. So working in the allied medical field. So there's exercise science, lots of other opportunities too. Then this hypothetical 19 or 20-year-old might be interested in sport management. So if they're interested in a career in the sport industry, maybe they want to be an administrator in intercollegiate athletics, or maybe they want to work in professional sport. That would be a track. So they take a lot of business courses as well as kinesiology classes. In the exercise science track, of course, they take a lot of science classes. They take, anatomy and physiology and chemistry and biology coursework. So a lot of our students do go on and work in the NCAA or in professional sports. And then our newest track is called health promotion. And we have students who go and work for corporations in employee wellness, a big thing, a big emerging field. But we also have students who go out and work in nonprofits, doing things like I talked about earlier, working for nonprofits in the community with at-risk kids, working with groups like Kaiser Permanente in their employee wellness, those kinds of things. So it's really, now it's not like that everywhere. It's not like that everywhere. Some places, some universities, if you're studying kinesiology, it might be a teacher training track will predominate, and so they're training physical education teachers for the public and private schools. Some places only do exercise science, so they're training people to go on and be physical therapists. So I really like what we have. We have this sort of 3-pronged approach. So if a student comes in and they're one of those 3, there's a home for them, and I like that because I have eclectic interests, and I think that would have suited me as an undergrad. I would like to have tried out things. And I don't know where I would have settled if I had those 3 choices. I'm not sure.
That's so funny to think about too, just how like your life has been everywhere. And so going into the one field that you really specialize in, you like really enjoy that there are 3 options.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's cool, right?
Yeah, it is.
And Nick, as you know, and we talked about briefly, I also, though I teach in my home department, right? Of course, but I teach in 2 other programs at the college as well. There's that January term thing.
Mm-hmm.
Get to travel.
Yeah.
My wife thinks I'm a lunatic traveling in Europe with 20 undergraduates, but anyway, there's the January term program, which is so cool. Honestly, it's wonderful. It's January, it's Southern Europe, but still it can be cold. And then the collegiate seminar program, that great books program is just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back to it being quite interesting how that, moving all over the place, getting exposed to a ton of different things.
Yeah.
You're very much in one spot, but you're all over the place, exposing your mind to many different things in a very similar way. Through seminar, through Jan term, through kinesiology in general, just like you stated, has such a wide variety. I mean, I went to Sonoma State, my undergrad's kinesiology.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I don't know if we had the business management style track, but we did a exercise science, kind of like a pre-physical education teacher credentialing track.
Very traditional.
And then mine, which was health and wellness, which is kind of the health promotion track.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting how you've kind of gravitated towards things that allow you to consistently be kind of like your eclectic self in all these different categories.
Well, I think that, that moment 25, 26, whatever it was years ago, that moment when I started at St. Mary's College was so important because I think that I'm a good fit with a liberal arts college.
Yeah.
With that, the breadth of offerings. The students will say that we force them to take a whole bunch of stuff, but with those breadth, it just fits. It feels like home. Yeah, It's been cool.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been
you.
really cool to hear your story. And
well, thanks for coming over, guys.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're grateful that you had us over. So,
Of course.
all right, awesome.